Hello and welcome. This is Dolly Lopez, your real estate broker and coach in the state of Florida and Kentucky. Welcome to your real estate journey, expert tips for buyers and sellers. And today, like every Thursday, I am joined by Valerie, one of my favorite real estate attorneys. Well, she's an attorney that does a lot more than real estate, but she works with our clients and a bunch of other clients on real estate. Welcome, Valerie. How are you?
I am great, Dolly. Super excited to be with you here today and all your followers.
I am very excited today because we're going to be looking at a CD. This is a document that there are quite some people that don't fully understand, or they even glance at it and they don't really know what they should be looking for.
Right.
So I'm very excited for you to teach our viewers and our followers what it is and what they should be looking at. So let's start. What is this? What's a CD?
Okay, so a CD is also referenced as what we call a closing disclosure. So it's minimized by C and D in order to, that's how we reference it in real estate. And sometimes they call it settlement statements as well. It's basically one document that's going to let you know all the costs related to the closing. Not only the buyer's costs, but also the seller's costs. And when I say all the costs, I mean absolutely all the costs. There are federal regulations that require that every single cost associated with that closing, whether it be as small as $2, be included in that closing disclosure, settlement statement, or sometimes in a different format, it's also called an ALTA. But it's nonetheless, they're all the same. They all list everything that's associated with costs associated with closing. So that's basically what it is. And it is a little confusing when you've never seen one before. And it's a little scary to look at, but I always love to explain it to our clients so they know exactly what it is that it says, and so they know all the costs related to the closing.
Awesome. So is a CD more for a buyer or for the seller?
So you're going to notice that if there's a lender involved in the transaction, so if the buyer is actually obtaining a loan in order to purchase, you're going to see what's called a buyer CD and a seller CD. I think what we're going to review today is going to be the one that's combined. So it's going to show both buyer and seller, but both of them, both buyer and seller, will be looking at CDs when a lender is involved. When there's no lender involved, then we're going to be looking at the same numbers, just in a different format that people like to call either an ALTA or also a HUD. But that one we can review another time when we're talking about cash transactions.
Perfect. So let's get to it. This is... And I'll kind of, if you can walk us through it.
Yeah. So the very first page is basically a summation of the loan, right? So if you see the very top part of this closing disclosure, it says closing disclosure in bold at the top. CD, they mean the same thing. So it's going to give you the basic information, right? It's going to let us know when we're closing. It's going to let us know who's our title agent. And as you see there, it says settlement agent Velasquez and Perez Law Firm. It's going to tell us the sale price. It's going to tell her who the borrower, who the seller, who the lender is. And then it's going to give us some basic terms for our loan. I say basic because the day of closing, the buyer is going to be signing a lot of other documents that are going to give us more details to the loan. But this is only going to give us the cost associated with the loan. So we're going to know that this is a 30-year mortgage, which is what's majorly used by people who are obtaining loans to purchase properties. And then right where we get to loan terms are the important part, right? So this is just an overview of the loan. I always want to make sure with my buyers that these are the terms that they agreed to, right? Because we have a loan amount right there, the $397,500. And then we have an interest rate of an 8.375. And then it's very important to note that this is a principal and interest payment. When it says monthly principal and interest, that does not mean that is what our buyer is going to be paying monthly. Why? Because if we scroll down, you're going to see that there's estimated escrows that are included in that. And those estimated escrows are going to typically include insurance, right? For your property insurance, property taxes. And sometimes, although not all the times, it include homeowners association fees. Not all the times they include it. Depends on the lender, depends on the structure of the loan, depends on how the lender wants to handle this particular loan. But I make it very clear that top payment of that $3,021.29, That is not your monthly payment. That is just your monthly payment as it relates to the principal and interest of the loan amount. But if you look at your projected payments and it says an estimated total monthly payment of 367 or 667 with 98 cents. Now that will be your monthly payments, and you'll see that it's going to be the same for 30 years. And how do we know it's going to be the same? Because it says payment calculations in gray. It says years 1 through 30. So that's how we know that for 30 years, that's going to be our fixed payment. Now, that estimated escrow is the only thing that can change from year to year, because sometimes insurance premiums go up, sometimes property insurances go up, sometimes property taxes go up. So it all depends on the situation of that year and where we're looking at as it relates to property taxes and property insurance. So it's very important to know that, yes, it's a fixed amount, but it could change ever so slightly, only because our policies and our homeowners insurance change, and so do our property taxes. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Now, sometimes, although not in this situation, we're going to have a mortgage insurance payment. And in that case, most of the time it won't say in gray years 1 through 30. Typically, it'll say years maybe 1 through 5, 1 through 8, depending on the lender. But that mortgage insurance is when you don't put a 20% down. When you don't put a 20% down, the mortgage company requires you to pay an additional fee, which is a mortgage insurance fee. And that sometimes is included, sometimes is not. In this situation, it wasn't. But first page is basically a summation of that. And if we go on to the second page, all righty. All right, so we'll see here that it says loan costs. So it's very important to know that sections A and B are all the costs related to obtaining a loan. What does it mean? You're going to be paying a broker fee. You're going to be paying, maybe you're paying down points because you want your interest rate to go down ever so slightly. So then you're going to see that your points that you're going to be paying down are going to be there as well. That's all going to be in that section A. The section B is going to be everything that had to be done in order to obtain the loan, such as the appraisal, credit reports, flood certifications, processing fees, any kind of background information they need from the borrower in order to approve them. It'll show up here in the section B, okay? These are, sometimes they're paid before closing, which we'll notice in this specific situation that the appraisal was paid before closing. It typically is paid before closing because the appraiser is going to require that payment before we get the appraisal report. So therefore, we'll note that in the I think it was like 600 or 800, I can't tell, 600, right?
600.
Yeah. So that $600 was already paid by the borrower, right? Borrower already paid it, but we have to, like I told you, federal regulation require us to reflect every payment associated with the closing. So that's why you'll see it there as paid before closing.
Perfect. And then what can you tell me about section C?
Of course, section C is what we have been here for all these weeks, doing all these great podcasts, talking about closings and title and what they mean and how it can help you and you know what a closing is all about. Section C is all about your title insurance, okay? It's going to give you 2 different title insurances. You're going to see that you're going to be paying what's called a lender's title insurance to Old Republic. That's going to be your basic policy amount. It's right in line 6, you're going to see that it's the lender's title insurance. Correct. That $2,000 exactly. That $2,000 figure, that's, like we've explained before, is a one-time fee that you pay for title insurance and you don't have to pay it again. Right above that, you'll see title endorsements. Some lenders require some endorsements to the policy. For instance, if it's part of a condominium, if it's a planned unit development, you're going to have endorsements in order to protect a policy even further. So that's what C is all about. C is all about your title insurance.
Perfect. Other cost. Because whenever we add up all the closing costs, they can add up pretty quickly. And a lot of people think, you know, I'm paying for the lender and realtor um and the closing agency. But is that it? But it's so much more than that. And this is the document, the exact document to look at, so you know all these charges.
Right.
So let's go to E.
So E is going to be the recording charges that you're required to pay per the contract, whether you be seller or buyer. So as we could see here, when it comes to the recording fees of a mortgage, the mortgage is $171.50, and then the recording of the deed, just the recording fees itself, is $18.50. When you add those two up, it's $190. That's what the buyer is required to pay when it comes to the recording of the mortgage, because you're the one obtaining the loan, and just the fee for recording the deed, which is going to now transfer over title to the new buyer. Those are very important costs that the buyer pays for the contract. Now is the fun part, the taxes on recording those two documents. You'll see that the seller in line 2 pays for the taxes on recording the deed, which is going to be subject to the purchase price, right? Whatever the purchase price may be, that's how that number is calculated. Then we're going to have the mortgage taxes, which is intangible taxes, and the state of Florida tax. There's two. That's going to depend on the loan amount, and that is paid by the buyer. So, and per the contract, right? Whether you're up north, because I know we talk a lot about, whether you're up north in Florida or you're down south in Florida, it doesn't matter whether you're up or whether you're down or whether you're in the central. Buyers will always pay for the taxes on the mortgage, and the sellers will always pay for the taxes on the deed.
Perfect. Okay. What is this prepaids?
So the prepaids is what we were talking about when we were talking about escrows. As I mentioned, some mortgage companies will require you to have a mortgage. Will require you to have an escrow account. That escrow account in this specific situation includes your homeowner's insurance, which is, as you could see there, it says homeowner's insurance premium to citizens. And then it includes your prepaid interest, okay? It's important to know what prepaid interest means. When you close on a property, let's say you close today, the date that we're at today is March 28th, right? Your first payment is not due April 1st. So because it's not going to be due April 1st, because it's just a few days away, they're always going to be collecting interest up until that first month of your payment. So in this situation, we have here that we closed on March 15th. The buyer had to pay interest on that loan from the 15th, the day we closed, till April 1st, because those few days are not going to be, he's not going to make a mortgage payment, because the mortgage payment won't be made until May 1st. So because the first mortgage payment is not made till May 1st, we need to make sure that we're collecting the interest from March. Why? Because interest payments are always paid in arrears. What that means is we're paying backwards. So when the first payment comes May 1st, you're paying for the month of April, right? So because we close March 15th, we need to make sure that we collect for those few days in March that are still remaining. And that's what the prepaid interest is related to, as you see the cost there when it says prepaids.
Perfect. Okay. Let's move on into the initial escrow payments at closing.
Yes. So this goes back to your escrow accounts, just as we've mentioned. You have your homeowner's insurance, which the borrowers are always going to collect upfront a few months. Why? So that they make sure that when the payment is due, and it's going to be due every year around the time that you bought. So in the example that we're showing, we bought in March. That means next March, they're going to be paying for the homeowner's insurance then, because it's a yearly expense. So the mortgage company always collects a few months in advance so that they can assure themselves that next year, when the time comes to make the payment, they'll have enough in the escrow account to make that payment. And the same goes for the property taxes. Property taxes are paid in November of every year. Whether you close in December or January or March or May or June, it doesn't matter. It's always November that the payments are made. So because everybody already knows that November is a payment that's made, depending on when you close, it's going to be determinative of how many months is collected to assure that in November of the following year, or November of that year, depending, right now this is a March closing. So November of this year of 2024, they have enough to collect and to pay the property taxes.
Perfect. Okay. And then what about this aggregate adjustment?
The aggregate adjustment is a federal regulation. They are not allowed by federal law to collect a certain amount of money. So because of the fact that they're collecting 7 months in property taxes and 3 months in homeowners insurance, there's a maximum of what can be collected initially in an escrow account. And so that's why we have that adjustment, that negative number. It's always usually a negative number. And that's only to comply with federal regulation. So it's deducting that amount, but not to worry. That doesn't mean that come November that it's going to be low. You'll have enough money in November and you'll have enough money next year during your closing in order to pay for the homeowner's insurance as well.
Perfect. And lastly, to go over this document, let's talk about age.
So as you can see, age is really primarily focused on the seller, because this is going to be all the other costs that the seller is required to pay. For instance, we're going to have commissions that they're going to pay. If anything appears in the lien search that we've spoken about, outstanding water bills, maybe permit issues, violations on estoppels, on associations, all of those other fees are going to show up in other. So here, for instance, we have a water bill that was outstanding in line 8. Then we have the commissions in 4 and 5. Again, it all depends on what the situation may be. We have a survey that the buyer is required to pay for. So these are all the other costs that, as you can see, are primarily towards the seller that are involved in this transaction.
Perfect. Okay. And just to look at the entire document. So why is this? Is this just a summary of the transactions? Well,
so it does say summary of transactions, but what's important to note here is that it says summary of transactions because, as you can see, line 3 says closing costs paid at closing, $21,804. That is a summary of page 2, right? All those costs that we just spoke about, all those costs that the buyer's going to pay for, all those costs that the sellers are going to pay for. That's why it says summary of transaction. But what this page also shows you, which is very important for not only buyer but also seller, is that it lets us know the prorations for the taxes, right? Because we have to prorate the property taxes. The seller is going to be responsible for the time period where the seller was still owner of that property. And then the buyer is going to obtain a credit from the seller for that time period, so that in November, as we spoke about, when we can go ahead and pay the property taxes, we already have that credit as a buyer from when the seller had possession of the property.
And let's think about this, because if we were to close on December, it would have been the opposite, because
Correct.
the property taxes would have been already paid. Then it would be more of a debit to the buyer, crediting the seller.
Correct. So once the bill comes out in November, it's always going to be that the seller is going to be getting a credit, because the seller is going to be paying for the bill, right? Because it's November. So once that November bill comes out and we're closing anytime between November and December, then we know that the buyer is the one that's going to be giving a credit to the seller, because it's the seller's responsibility to make that payment.
Perfect. Okay. And then here you would definitely see this is the earnest money deposit that was already submitted, and then the loan amount given.
Right.
Borrower.
Right. Because these are all your credits, right? All the buyer's credits. And when we say credits, we mean money that's already been given to you for this closing. First and foremost, we'll have the deposit. Whatever deposit you gave and the complete deposit, whether it be that you made 2 or just 1, will be included there. And then the full loan amount, because that's money that's being given to you in order to go ahead and purchase this property, which is why on the very, very bottom, you'll see cash to close, and then a little check mark that says from borrower. And then now we know exactly the money you need to bring as a buyer to the closing table in order to make sure that this closing goes through.
Perfect. And here you would see how much money the seller
Correct.
will be.
Right.
getting.
Here you'll see how much the seller gets, and then on an end, which says due from seller, that's where there's going to be, if there's any mortgages or home equity loans or anything like that, any payoffs that need to be paid, that the property has been used as collateral, that's where you're going to find mortgage payoffs and any kind of loans that the property uses as collateral. And that's how you'll get what is due to the seller the day of closing.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Well, here I'm just going to show this last pages. It really doesn't have.
No, the last pages are really just not as important. It tells you basically just a little bit more about the loan and the life of the loan, the 30 years. So I go through it very quickly with my buyers because it's not money that we're going to be putting up front. It's not money that we're paying right now. It's just money that we're going to be seeing over the course of the 30 years.
Perfect. Valerie, thank you so much. I so much appreciate you spending your time teaching us about all of this. It's really great information. I hope whenever next time you are you're in the process of buying, take a look at the CD because definitely gives you a whole lot of details on what you're paying and what you're not. And one of the things that I do with my clients is if I see a charge that shouldn't be there, I'll definitely reach out to the lender or to the closing agency and just get more insight of what it is because all the charges should definitely be there. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching, for following us. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. If there's any questions, feel free to reach Valerie directly. The phone number is on the screen, or you can also reach out to me and I'll definitely help as much as I can. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.